Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of The Other Side of Addiction. I'm your host, Al Richards, and we have a real special guest with us today. One that I think I've been trying 6 months to get you on the show, and we got Randall Carlisle.
You say special guest about everyone.
I do.
Come on,
I do. No, and you're 100% right, because they're all special to me, right?
All right.
Yeah, so, and I think even the show that we did earlier, I said a real special guest, just like I did you.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So thank you, Randall, for taking time out of your day to be with us.
Thank you for inviting me. I love sharing my story now.
Yeah.
Years ago, I wouldn't share it with anyone. So,
yeah, and a matter of fact, I'm glad that you said that, because that's what the caption is today, is basically a dirty little secret, and we'll get into that a little bit more. And we actually have a brand new guest co-host, and I gotta thank my good friend at the other side of Academy, downtown Salt Lake, Robin Sims, because she hooked me up with Danny, her brother, a.k.a. Goose.
Yep, pretty
right?
much. Yep.
Yeah.
Where'd you get that name?
Can't tell you on air, man. I got a dirty little secret.
Oh, you got a dirty little secret too.
Okay.
All right.
No, it's not that bad.
I'm going to have to hit Robin up on
It's
this
not
one.
it's not even worth staying. It's not even fun.
Oh, all right. Cool. Oh my gosh, Randall. So those of you who didn't grow up here in Utah, I mean, your face was on TV every single night. I remember watching you as a young man on TV.
Yeah, most people say my parents made me watch the news, and that's why I remember you. Yeah.
No, I won't say that, because that wasn't true.
Okay.
You know, and I heard your name come up, gosh, probably 7 or 8 months ago. And I don't know if that was the first time that I met Rachel Santizo. And my wife introduced me to her. And my wife went to Odyssey, and she was telling me, "Oh, do you remember Randall Carlisle?" And I'm like, "Yeah, he was the news guy, right?" And
Right.
she goes, "Yeah, he has this incredible story, and Rachel and him do a podcast." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh!" And we had been not even quite a year into our podcast. Like, I got to get this guy on the flippin' show. So, yeah, again, thank you.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. So, tell us a little bit more about you. I mean, I've got your bio, but I'd like people to hear it from you.
Well, I never planned to get into radio or television, but when I was 14, I won the Ohio State radio announcing contest, because I was lucky enough that my hormones had dropped my voice already, right? And all it was, I remember it was at Ohio State University, the competition, and all it was you sat down in a radio studio at their broadcast facility, and you had to read cold copy. So you never got to look it over, and then you read it. And I've always been an avid reader, and I got through it probably pretty flawlessly, and I won the contest. And I grew up in this little town in northeastern Ohio, and we had one little radio station. It was a daytime station, which, for those of you who don't know, you sign on with the sun up and you sign off with the sun down. And in the summer, you get to stay on longer. And it was a little, I think it was 5,000 watts at 960 on the dial. I remember that. WWST for Worcester, which was the town that I grew up in. They offered me a part-time job at 14, and I worked there part-time through, and it was exciting, you know, at that age to be able to work at a radio station, and I did everything. I wrote copy for advertisers. I cleaned the toilets when we signed off at night. I got, back then, I don't know what the rules are now because I haven't been in radio for a long time, but I had to get a third-class license because frequently I was the only person at the station, and you had to take transmitter readings, once every hour or something like that to make sure that you were broadcasting on the right frequency. And so I kept doing that through high school. I went to college in Columbus, got a job at the local rock and roll station at the time, and it was the only one. So we were big time in Columbus because you had that whole Ohio State University co-eds. I say co-eds because it was easy to pick up women back then. But and I worked there. I went from there to Akron and then Detroit in radio, and I worked at one of the giant And this was before FM. It shows you how old I am. And I worked at a station across the border in Windsor that was owned by RKO, CKLW, and it was at 800 on the dial, and we hit 27 states and 5 provinces. And I did news. I did radio news. And at the time, the Drake format had just come out on RKO radio. We were a rock and roll station, and we called our news 2020 News, because every other station did their news on the hour and a half hour, and we did it at 20 after and 20 till, so that when people tuned out from other stations, they'd tune into our station, and we made our news so sensational that perhaps people who liked rock and roll wouldn't tune out. Then I read in a newspaper about one of the anchormen in Detroit and how much money he was making. And you got to remember, I'm in my 20s, mid-20s,
Yeah.
and I said, I want to get into TV because obviously that's where the money is. And I had a friend at one of the local stations, because it was hard to make a tape back then. You didn't have cameras like we have now, and you had to send out the tapes to stations across the country. I made an audition tape, and the only place that would hire me was a station in Colorado Springs. And I went from making, because we were all unionized in Detroit, and I believe it or not, in my early 20s, I was making $50,000 a year. And we were
that's
all
a lot
in our
of money
20s.
back then,
And that was big money. And I went from that to $11,000 a year to be a weekend anchor, weekday street reporter at this station in Colorado Springs. And everything worked out well. I went from Colorado Springs to Dayton, to Salt Lake City, to Minneapolis, to Dallas, and back to Salt Lake City as a main anchor for stations. And that's back when they were paying really big money. They're not anymore, but it was a very lucrative business back then.
Holy cow.
Yeah. So I've been around. So if
Yeah.
you lived in either any of those cities, you might have seen me. And I still run into people who recognize the name because of that station that I worked at in Detroit. We were number one in like Detroit, Cleveland, Toledo, and we'd come into New York. So we'd come along the Eastern Seaboard at night like a local station. We had some weird bounce on Saturday mornings where they'd hear us in Vancouver, and we were number one at some state prison in Florida too. So it was it was all very heady at the time for somebody in your 20s making $50,000 a year, being heard by all these people.
Yeah.
So
And that had to be what? The 19 what?
early 70s.
Early 70s?
Yeah.
Holy cow, yeah, I wish I was making that kind of money at,
Yeah, I know.
20-something years old.
And my predictions, and back then I remember the first FM station in Detroit, and it was like they were playing long album cuts, and then the jocks between cuts would go, oh man, here's another clip from Led Zeppelin.
I love it.
And I remember all of us at this highly formatted radio station saying they're never going to make it. FM's never going to make it.
Yeah.
And obviously not a good prediction. So
Kind of like when the internet came out, right? I remember seeing TV shows when the internet, I think it was, what is it, Good Day, or one of the morning shows like back in New York, and they're like, what's
Right.
this internet thing?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
this
not
thing
gonna
isn't
work.
going to go anywhere.
That's
now
what
we
I
can't
said,
live
too.
without it, right?
I know. I said that too. The first person, I was working at Channel 4, and a geeky producer said, he got permission to, and back then you had to dial up the internet through a phone or something,
Yeah,
and then it would
yeah.
ring or something, and then go, and then you were hooked in. And he was trying to show us how it worked. And I remember if you typed in something, whatever site you were going to, it took like 6 minutes for the front page to load. And I remember saying the same thing, saying this is never going to make it. So my predictions about FM and the internet were pretty bad.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. That's crazy. My gosh, that was interesting stuff. As far as your family life. I mean, did you come from a really good family? And the reason why I asked that, Randall, is for those that are in the addiction world or in recovery, we all know that addiction doesn't discriminate. You know, it hits people. We've had people on the show that have come from broken up homes, troubled homes. We've come from people who've had very loving homes, very religious homes. Right. So I like to ask that question just so people know that, and they're hearing the variety.
I didn't think. I grew up in, I suppose, what you call a middle class home, because the middle class existed back then.
Yeah.
And I never thought that my childhood contributed to my alcoholism, but after years of sobriety and therapy, I guess what happened may have. I don't know. I can't blame it on alcoholism. Runs rampant on the paternal side of my family. My dad was not an alcoholic, but every other male figure in his before him were all alcoholics. My father beat me severely when I was younger, and I was a rebel, and at the time I thought I probably deserved it, but he was pretty brutal. And then the other thing that I've finally come to admit is I was working in professional theater when I was. They wanted cute little blonde-haired, blue-eyed boys for a couple of plays, and I was working in a professional theater company, and of course this was in 6th grade. When you're that age and you're working with all these adults, you sort of look up to them. And this one guy, the music director for the company, he took an interest in me and offered to take me home every night after rehearsal so my parents didn't have to drive. And my parents had him over to dinner and they thought it was wonderful. And he ended up molesting me.
Oh,
man. And whether that contributed, I don't know. But as you say, I mean, like when we take people into Odyssey House, we do questions about you're growing up,
yeah.
and an awful lot of the people who are checking in for treatment did have trauma in their background when they were younger. So, I guess you could call that trauma, my dad beating me and me being molested by a guy.
Absolutely.
So,
and it was, I think my wife was going at the Phoenix at the time, and they had gotten that out, that she was probably sexually assaulted.
Yeah.
When she was a young girl, and it all started by a game that they were doing there at the Phoenix. They have these different exercises like
right.
they do in a lot of recovery centers, and all of a sudden it started bringing these flashbacks to her, and she started thinking more about it, and she was like, oh my gosh, something that she buried really, really deep, which you can understand why. And then,
sure,
had no clue. When she shared that with me, I was just like in awe.
Well, and I kept it buried for years.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're in 6th grade, you don't tell your buddies, "Hey, this guy did this to me the other night."
Yeah.
So I kept it buried for a long time. I mean, I've only come clean with myself with sobriety. And I'm willing to talk about anything now because it's the truth and it happened, and that's the way life is.
Well, and people like yourself, Randall, and other guests that come on this show, when they open up and they're being vulnerable and they're sharing stuff that's happened to them in their life, that could be what one of our listeners needed to hear.
Sure.
Because they could be holding on to something too and not wanting to talk about it. And they're like, oh my gosh, well, if this person can do it and this person can do it, so can I.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had a gal scheduled, about 4 or 5 months ago who was going to come on the show, and she went through a lot of sexual abuse as a young girl. And it was basically the day of the show, and she texts me and she goes, I can't do this, Al. I am just not ready. And I get it.
Sure.
It's like, hey, no worries. When you're ready, you let me know, because your voice is going to help someone, even if it's just one person.
True.
So I'm always grateful for our guests that come on the show and share a part of their life that they're not proud of what they've done themselves or what someone else has done to them, or just where life has taken them, to be able to step up. And that was one of the things, sharing a little bit about my story, where I was ashamed to tell people about my wife's alcoholism because I didn't want my family to judge her. I didn't want my friends to judge her. I was doing enough judging myself, basically. Really I was. And I held it in for a long, long time, and I had no clue how bad it was hurting me. It got so bad, and a lot of our listeners who watch our show have heard me say this quite a bit, but in 2019, I was on my way home from a networking group, and I'm like, I'm done. I'm done. I'm going to go home and get my pistol. I'm going up in the mountains where I love to be, and I'm done.
Yeah, I think the same for me with my sister. When she first went to the Other Side Academy, I didn't tell anybody. It wasn't because I was ashamed of her. I was just more worried how they were going to judge her.
Yeah.
So you kind of just take that back, and you're like, man, I don't want them to judge her, think less of her. She's going to do something for herself, and here we are.
Yeah. Well, and we're all right in a way, really, because people do judge. We had a gal on our show who does stuff for you, Sarah, and she helps with the Craft Family Support Group. And her son lost his battle with heroin addiction, and she goes, if she kept it from neighbors and people, and she's like, if I told people that my son was battling cancer, they'd be knocking on my door saying, hey, what can we do to help you? Are you okay? And they'd bring food. But she goes, if I told them my son was a heroin addict, she goes, no one's bringing casseroles to my door.
Yeah, that's true.
And when she said that, I was like, oh my gosh, that is such a great way of looking at it, but it is true.
And I think things are changing because of like podcasts like this, or the one I do with Rachel Santizo, when we call it Odyssey House Journals. I think when people come out and start talking about it, it helps to remove the stigma. And I don't think there is as much of a stigma now that people, I don't think people are that afraid anymore to say, my son or daughter is in rehab, or my husband or wife or whatever, or I go to AA meetings or any of that stuff. And I find people more and more, as opposed to looking down, saying, "Oh, all you got to do is stop drinking or stop shooting heroin." I find people are beginning to give you a little credit because you're working on yourself, as opposed to thinking you're a lowlife.
Yeah.
I think if you're realizing more of addiction too, what that means, people are understanding it a little more instead of just placing blame or judgment.
Well, and I think they're accepting that. There's still a lot of people who don't accept the fact that it is a disease, and it needs to be treated like any other disease. You use the example of cancer or diabetes. I mean, the fact that I have to shoot insulin every day. Nobody frowns upon that, but I just think it's becoming, as we progress. I mean, there's a lot of things wrong with society right now, but I think one thing that is improving is the way society deals with addiction.
Yeah, you are, and you're 100% correct. You are starting to see a shift, starting to happen.
I mean, even in Utah. I mean, it used to be. Especially if you were LDS, you never admitted that there was something wrong in your family. Well, the LDS Church has its own recovery services. So obviously they've accepted the fact that people are alcoholics or are substance use abusers. And I don't think. I don't think people going to I'm not Mormon, but I don't think people going to their neighborhood ward house would look down on somebody if somebody said, my son went to the Other Side Academy or Odyssey House or something because he had a heroin issue or an alcohol issue. I just and I think people are beginning to understand that it's not a reflection on you as a parent because your kid is screwed up. That they're addicted and they've got a disease that they have to deal with.
Yeah. I think it's just really good for, again, you said it, with shows like this and yours, your and Rachel's show, and a lot of other ones that people are finally starting to come out and they're starting to talk about it. They're not ashamed. They're not afraid of it. we have a good friend who was my guest co-host for a long time, and she recently had a baby, and they got in a bad car accident, and her husband's head's been really bothering him, so they're moving back east where the air's a little thinner because they found out it's really helping him. And she's LDS, and she was asked to get up and talk. And she decided that she was going to talk about her husband's sex addiction in an LDS church. And she goes, it was so funny to see, because a lot of the people who would get up and come over and talk to her after sacrament, a few of those people wouldn't even look at her. Other people started coming up to her going, oh my gosh, thank you so much for sharing this. And I even told her, I says, girl, you got a lot of balls.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, to get up at church in sacrament and talk about your husband's sex addiction. She did it on the show, but that's a show.
That's
but
different.
to say it in a church,
Yeah.
my gosh. And it was really cool to hear some of the stuff that she was saying, what other people were saying to her. Because, again, I think a lot of people say if we don't talk about it, we just ignore it, it's not really happening. It's not there. Well, guess what, people? It's happening.
Yeah.
And it's happening everywhere.
Sure.
You know, when I first started speaking up, when I finally first started sharing, it was a buddy of mine who we were sitting down having coffee at a coffee shop in West Jordan, High Point Coffee, who's one of our sponsors, by the way. He's like, Al, you need to share this story. And I'm like, who wants to listen? He goes, who the hell wouldn't? Because there are people out there that's going through what you're going through. And I started thinking about it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, so right. So then when I started talking about it, I've been one who's done a lot of networking for years. Been involved with a lot of the chambers around the valley. And I had people coming up to me after events and going, hey, do you got a minute to talk to me in private? It's like, yeah, sure. And would go off to the side, and they're like, you probably didn't know this, but I used to be an addict. I'm like, what? I've known you for 8 years. I had no clue. And because I was sharing my story, they were willing to come up to me and say what they battled through. And I still find it to this day. Our guest co-host, Dr. Smith, who was on the show today as our guest co-host, we were just chatting at the gym. And it's crazy how many people I've had on the guest that I've met, like at the gym, or standing in line at a flippin' store, or going to like recovery day. Of course, there's a lot of recover people out there. It just blows me away. Everywhere I flip and go, you run into someone who has either battled addiction themselves or who has a loved one that's battling addiction. So
I would venture to say that there are very few people alive who are not either related to or know of someone who is fighting addiction.
yeah,
I agree with that 100%.
You know,
yeah,
and that's huge.
It's rampant. It's everywhere.
I told you guys before we started recording, that the greatest thing in the world would be for places like Odyssey House or the Other Side Academy or any of the myriad of hundreds of treatment centers if we all went out of business because there was no need for us.
Yeah.
But that's not going to happen. So.
yeah. At least not in this time, right?
Not while I'm alive, but I'm an old guy. So, you know, if maybe I'll be looking down saying, hey, it finally happened.
Yeah, it
Addiction
finally
went
happened.
away. Or somebody, I've always wondered about this because you got to figure drug companies are in it for the money. And you've got to believe that there are R&D people who are working on something, some kind of drug that will totally eliminate addiction in your brain, that they're working on it. And I mean, as long as it doesn't cause deformed babies or people to go nuts or anything, what a miraculous thing that would be. You know?
Oh, yeah.
Because it would apply, I'm pretty sure, I'm obviously not a doctor, but I would think if you got rid of whatever is going on in your brain that causes addiction, it would get rid of all addictions, I would think. You know.
You would think. Yeah, you would definitely think. I remember I got a call from my wife's attorney once, and he called up and he goes, hey, Al, courts are getting tired of her coming in and out.
Yeah.
You know, she's getting close to where a judge is about ready to say, okay, guess what? You're going to prison.
Yeah.
Which I don't agree with. You know, I don't think jail and prison. Now, there are some who their addiction has got them in where they've done some really nasty things and hurt a lot of people. And they probably do deserve to be there. But there are a lot of them who do not.
Right.
And he's like, what do you suggest? And I remember telling him, I'm like, she needs to go somewhere where they can get inside her head, because there is something going on inside there that I'm not understanding. She's not understanding. There's something that's causing her to go back to what she keeps going back to, and I know there are a few recovery centers around the valley now that are, instead of calling themselves recovery centers, they're calling themselves health recovery. They're adding the word health in there. They're starting to realize, I think, now that there's something deeper, going through the 12 steps and different things like that. All good stuff for those that works for others. They disagree. They like, because all of us don't like the same hotel. You might like a different hotel than one I like, and it's just what prefers to us. But I think they're starting to see, we need to get in a little bit deeper and see what's causing things to fire up here.
Odyssey we call ourselves a behavioral health treatment center.
Behavioral health.
And the primary reason, other than the fact that we don't allow smoking,
that drove my wife nuts.
The primary reason that people leave our program, because obviously it's not a lockdown program, is because one of our goals is to do exactly what you said, is drill down and say, okay, what is this? Get somebody like me to say, I was molested when I was in 6th grade, because people don't talk about those kinds of things. And one of the biggest reasons that people leave is because they don't want to deal with those issues. And so when a therapist starts drilling down into, but what really happened, or, that kind of stuff, then I say, screw this, I'm just not going to share that with a group of people. I'm just not going to do it. I'm out of here. And it's a very difficult thing for people to do,
Oh, it's very difficult. And the reason why I can say that is when I first met Robin and Dave out there at the Other Side Academy, they asked me to come out and talk. So last December, I went out and shared my story of what it was like being on the other side, what I went through being on the other side of addiction. And they gave me a tour of the place. And I started meeting a lot of the people that had worked there who actually went through the program and never left. They've just stayed, like your sister, basically. And they put me in this room with this circle with one of their programs that they do, I guess you should say. And they call you out. Now, they're like, do you want the G-rated version or the X-rated version? I'm like, well, how do you do it with your students? And they're like, okay. And just out of the blue, all of a sudden, someone just started screaming at me. And I was like, the hell is going on? And then some other person jumps in, and another person jumps in. I'm sitting here in this chair, Randall, and I could feel these little teeny beads of sweat forming on my forehead. And and my wife's there, and the gal that we invited to come in and take pictures during my talk, she was there. And I'm just sitting here, and pretty soon I could feel my underarms getting wet. Anyway, they drilled me for like about 8 minutes or so. And after it was done, it's like, so how do you feel? I'm like, man, I'm about ready to cry because I didn't even do any of this. I'm like, this is what you guys do? And they're like, we call you out on your bullshit.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine, I can't imagine because I went through it. And it's like, holy crap, for anyone to go through that is tough.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's it would be hard. Well, you're not an addict. And even if you didn't have an alcoholic wife, okay, just to take anybody off the street who is not dealing with an addiction to go through something like that, it would be really hard for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, being called out for anything is
right.
tough, putting on the spot.
Sure.
It's tough.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and they really open your eyes, because it opened my eyes on some things. Yeah. It really did. And even after we left, my wife was like, are you okay? And I'm like, man, I'm still going through that crap in my head of what just happened to me. And this was an hour and a half later, because I had to go talk after that event, and I had to kind of ground myself again. But it stayed with me for weeks. It really did. I really had to start evaluating my life and how I look at things. And am I this person who I think I am? or am I bullshitting myself?
Right.
So
Holding yourself accountable a little bit, trying to figure out what's going on up there. Yeah.
If you think about it, and I love looking back at the history of AA, which is really an interesting history, but really that's the basis of what they were doing way back when. You get two alcoholics talking to each other about why they drink or why they feel the need to drink and what's going on in their life. And all of a sudden, they may slow down on their drinking or stop, And if you take an AA meeting, when people share, sometimes it's crap and it doesn't mean anything, but other times you have really heartfelt sharing, and it gives you insight into, what they're and it's therapy for them sharing and therapy for you listening. So the concept, and that was back in the 1930s, and a lot of their, and I'm not trying to push AA, but it did help me along with the treatment I went through too. But a lot of the things that they talk about back in the 30s are still relevant today. And if you take the 12 steps and you don't relate it to alcohol or drugs, there's except for the first couple of steps where you're nuts and you got to admit that you're out of control. But the rest of them, like taking an inventory of yourself and what's good and what's bad, making amends to people that you've hurt, spreading good stuff to other people, those are all worthwhile things for everybody. It doesn't matter whether you're addicted to something, So those guys were pretty smart back in the 1930s. Yeah. One of the things, I grew up in Ohio, and Ohio is the birthplace of AA, Akron, Ohio, and it was two guys, a stockbroker and a doctor, getting together at a hotel because they both wanted to get drunk, and they stayed up talking all night and didn't get drunk, and so that's where but anyway, the home of AA. And when I grew up in Ohio history, that was not part of Ohio history, and it should be, because AA is a worldwide, thing.
Yeah.
And I finally, when I went back to visit my mom a couple of years ago, I said, because my home is only an hour's drive away from Akron. And I didn't even know it existed as the birthplace of AA. So we went over I said, we're going to go over and check out the birthplace of AA. And it was interesting because it's just a very, very average home that was built back in the 30s. So it had like a living room, dining room, kitchen, and bathroom on the main floor, and then I think 2 bedrooms upstairs. And the guy, Dr. Bob, he would go down to Skid Row in Akron and bring people home to talk to them about sobriety. So they had this one bathroom, and I'm sure all these guys are puking their guts out, and they're terrible. And his wife must have been a real gem to deal with that. Him bringing home all these bums every night, But the interesting thing, and I don't know whether this was a marketing ploy or what, and it's manned by people as part of AA service of people in the Akron area, but the home is up on a little slope up, and guess how many steps there are to get to the home?
12.
Bingo. Now, whether,
interesting.
I don't know if they rebuilt it with 12 steps or if it really was 12 steps when AA started.
I got a friend from Ohio that knows everything about Ohio, so I'm excited to let him know. I might know something he doesn't know now.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Give him a little something.
Yeah, because most people know Akron, Ohio as the NFL Hall of Fame.
Yeah, he tells me that every day.
Or it used to be the home of all the, it used to be called the rubber capital because all the tires were made there, Firestone, and not anymore, of course. The other thing that wasn't, this has nothing to do with our podcast, really. The other thing that wasn't taught in Ohio history, first, the birthplace of AA, and it should be in Ohio history. The other thing that was not ever taught in Ohio history was the story of the Mormons coming through Kirkland, Ohio, and being driven out of the state because people thought they were weird.
Yeah.
And and they have a whole little town and everything there to remember. It was the first place that Joseph Smith and his brother were preaching and everything, and I had no idea until I moved to Utah that the Mormons had gone through Ohio and been driven out, and it was like a 50-minute drive from where I grew up to see that. And I took my mom to see that as well because but those two things are not taught in Ohio history, which I think is stupid.
Yeah, it definitely should be.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a new project for you, Randall.
Yeah, right.
To
change the Ohio history.
Yeah, change the history a little bit.
Yeah.
And I've had quite a few guests on the show that really do believe, and I would have to say I'd probably have to agree with them that they think everyone should read the Big Book. They think, because really the stuff in there. Now, I've not read it.
There's
a lot of the
there's
stuff
a
that my
short
wife has
version
shared.
called the 12 and the 12. It's just a brief explanation of the 12 steps and the 12 traditions. And I sent it to my mom when I got sober, and she read it and she said, "Well, this makes a lot of sense." And I think everybody should read it.
Yeah.
People look at it as, I think people still remember how AA is portrayed in the movies where it's a bunch of old guys smoking a bunch of cigarettes in a dark room, drinking tons of coffee. And I think that's the image that a lot of people still have of like AA meetings.
Yeah. And eating donuts. Yeah. My wife and I, we just got done watching that series. I don't know if it's on HBO or Hulu or one of them. It's called The Flight Attendant.
Yeah.
And it's got the gal in it who played in, what series was that? They were like all geniuses, and I don't remember.
I watched The Flight Attendant. I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty good because she started drinking as a young girl with her dad, and they had a son, but yeah, she was drinking beer, I think, at age 9 or something like that, going out hunting with her dad, pounding Budweiser. Yeah, it's crazy.
He was saying Big Bang Theory.
Big Bang Theory. Thank you. That's what it was. The blonde-haired gal that plays in the Big Bang Theory. I can't remember what her name is.
Kelly Kuko or something.
Kelly Kuko. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Oh my gosh. So, I love where this first half is going, and yes, Randall, I say that all the time on every show too.
See,
when we come back, though, I would really like to get into basically the dirty little secret. I have gone through your bio, and just to know a little bit more history of where the alcohol started taking you, and you even said in your bio that you were pretty much a functional, right, alcoholic. You never drank during work, but right after work, and it's just so amazing to hear these stories. We had Lemma Harrington on the show as well, and oh my gosh, his story was just it's just crazy when he shared his story when he got busted in Pioneer Park buying heroin, and this guy was a well-known TV guy and did the sports.
BYU football player.
Football player. So so when we come back from the break, let's kind of touch base on that.
The dirty secret.
We
come back. See, I'm used to saying that because in news you always had a tease at the end of the segment saying, when we come back, I can't even think of it. It had to be something sexy, though.
Yeah.
So we'll be back right after this.
Because it intrigues them, right? And I've been learning more about this, so I'm getting better at it.
Well, the master of... here's your camera. That's my camera. He's pointing to the camera. That's what floor directors used to do for us. Yeah. One of the Peter Jennings thing, in a network newscast, there's only 2 cameras, not 3. So you're either looking at this one or that one. And I'll never forget Peter Jennings doing this. Because in our studio we had 3 because you're dealing with sports guy and weather and all that kind of stuff. And it was something I've never seen on network TV. Like if I'm looking at that camera, the tech guy would take this camera, and so what we're taught to do is sort of look down and then look up at this camera. Okay, and so Peter, he's looking at this camera and he knows from his monitor that this camera is on him. So he looks over here, and right when he turns, they take this camera. So he turns this way, and they take this camera, and it happened like 2 or 3 times. And this is why I love the guy. He'd look between the cameras. He said, "You tell me which camera I should look at, and I'll look at it, okay?" And this was on a network newscast.
Oh, my gosh.
That was a good way to handle it.
Yeah, really good way to handle it. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to take some of Randall's advice. Guys, stay with us for the second half so we can hear a dirty little secret.
Have you ever been in a car accident? Do you know what to do after being in a car accident? Are the insurance companies going to take care of you? Hi, I'm attorney Rick Heaton with the Law Office of Bobby Udall. I will help you through the process and answer all of these questions. I give every single client my cell phone so they can talk to me whenever they need. Let me deal with the insurance company so you can focus on getting better from your injuries. Call me at 385-330-0226. Again, my cell phone number, 385-330-0226. Don't call the insurance company first. Call attorney Rick Heaton at 385-330-0226.
Hello, my friends. This is Brad Neufeld, and I want to thank you for tuning in to the Resilience Talk Network. You can listen to my show, Resilience, every morning, Monday through Friday at 8 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. On my show, we will be discussing what it takes for you to overcome the day-to-day challenges that all of us face in life, as well as some of the devastating ones that may lead us to feelings of hopelessness and despair. It's my goal to provide you with the tools and skills that you need to overcome anything that is thrown your way. To find out more about my show, visit our website at www.resiliencetalk.com. That's www.resiliencetalk.com. And as always, until we meet again, go for everything that you want in life and make it happen.
Good morning, this is Leticia with Computer Hospital. We are your computer repair experts for both PC and Mac. We are your community resource for all of your computer repair needs. What makes us different is that we want to fix your computer. We also do free diagnostics. We charge a flat rate labor, which means that you won't pay by the hour. All of our computer repair is done in-house with a fast turnaround time, and same-day service is also available. Feel free to stop by anytime without an appointment. We're located in Sandy at 8721 South State Street. Again, that's 8721 South State Street. Or call us at 801-987-3993. Again, that's 801-987-3993. This is Leticia with Computer Hospital, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Hello there, this is Brad Neufeld with the Resilience Talk Network, and I would like to introduce to you Taffytown, one of our newest sponsors. Let me introduce you to Derek.
Hi, I'm Derek from Taffytown. We're proud sponsors of the Other Side of Addiction podcast. Taffytown is a family-owned and operated business still operating in the Salt Lake City area for over 100 years. We manufacture some of America's best saltwater taffy.
What makes Taffytown stand out from all of the others?
We have a unique recipe, a whip-style recipe that incorporates egg whites, evaporated milk, real sea salt. It's a unique product that is flavorful, melts in your mouth, and the best part is we probably have a flavor for anyone's liking, a flavor for any reason, for any season. We have unique flavors like chicken and waffles, maple bacon, frosted cupcake. New this year was a pineapple ghost pepper flavor.
That's awesome. Where can people find out more about Taffytown and all of its products?
You can check all of this stuff out. All of our products are available for sale on taffytown.com. We ship for free from our website, so all of our pricing on there is shipping included. Oftentimes we offer special promotions and discounts to our loyal customers, so do be sure to sign up for an account, and we look forward to seeing what we can do to make you smile with our taffy.
Where are you located?
We are currently located at 9813 South Prosperity Road in West Jordan, Utah, just at the foothills of the Copper Canyon Mine.
Derek, taffy has always been a great gift to give. What are some of the creative ways Taffy Town can help say thank you to others?
Yeah, if you're looking for gift ideas, whether to say thank you to friends or family, or maybe to your clients after such a difficult or successful year that you've had, you could look no further than to get a gift idea from taffytown.com. We offer pre-packaged gift boxes that say that it's saltwater taffy from the city of the Great Salt Lake, and it tells a little bit about the history of our community and making candy for so long. You can also do customized gifts to pick out just the right flavors or colors of candy for that special someone, and deliver even a personalized message in that box to them. So please feel free to check out taffytown.com for any gift ideas this season.
Thank you so much, Derek. Please visit taffytown.com. That's taffytown.com to find out more about the products and services that Taffy Town offers. You won't be disappointed.
Do you know someone who's gambling with death due to an addiction? Do you know someone whose life is being turned upside down due to a loved one that's battling with addiction? Hi, I'm Al Richards. I am the host of the Other Side of Addiction podcast. I started the podcast due to my wife's battle with alcohol. Let's just say I became addicted to her addiction. Our podcast is helping people understand a little more about those who have battled addiction and those who are hurting from their addiction. Through raw vulnerability, we share stories that help uncover the root causes of addiction. Shame felt on both sides, matter of the conscious and subconscious mind, continued beliefs, and often confusing paths of recovery. We collaborate with real people and their stories, as well as licensed professionals, to help our audience gain a better understanding of addiction. You can find us on Resilience Talk Network. You can also find us on Facebook at Mr. Al Richards. That's Facebook at Mr. Al Richards. You can also find us on YouTube. Just look up the Other Side of Addiction podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Other Side of Addiction. We are here with our special guest, and yes, they're all special, Randall.
Yes,
and,
I know.
Randall
I'm not going to
Carlisle.
mock you out again.
All right. But no, and I'm glad that you brought that up. But again, all our guests are special. That's how we look at it. And again, I'm just very grateful to be in the same room with you and Danny here, and all of our other guests. It's just, I just cannot wait for Thursdays to come around, because this is just what I want to do. You know, really, it's very therapeutic for me, and it gets me to understand a little bit more about people who battle addiction, what they've gone through. And I've shared many times, will I ever understand it 100%? No, because I've not walked in those shoes. But man, if I can, I've probably gone from 1% to maybe an 8% of knowing a little bit more about it and the battles that my wife has gone through. And, you know, my wife still battles it. She's coming up, gosh, on the 9th of November, which is my daughter's birthday. She'll be 23 months.
Awesome. 23
months sober, and it's a blessing. And she's had her challenges.
Sure.
Definitely through it, and she's still going. Matter of fact, she's at training today at USARA to become a peer support specialist.
Good.
She's been
Good for
training
her.
all week.
Good. USARA does a wonderful job.
Yeah,
They-
yeah, a lot of good people out there.
Well, and the cool thing about working in treatment centers or a peripheral thing like Fit to Recover or USARA, it helps keep you sober. I mean, you know, and so you're getting paid, albeit not very much, but you're getting paid or you're volunteering, and by giving, you're getting.
Yeah.
And it's it's just. Let me put it like this: like after the 10 o'clock news every night, people would say, "Let's go to the bar." Okay, I've worked at Odyssey House for 5 years now, and not one person has ever said, "Let's go to the bar" at the end of the day. So,
Well, and I guess that is a good thing, right?
well, it's easier to stay sober.
Yeah.
I've got over 10 years now, and I don't think about it that much. But I will say, it's a lot easier working at a place like Odyssey than it is at Channel 4.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that, although I know an awful lot of people who work in the news who are alcoholics, so maybe there's
Yeah.
something to it. It's a high pressure job, and that's not an excuse, but it is.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's your chance to relax a little bit and chill and feel somewhat decent. I mean, I shared on the show many times. I had a job in manufacturing for 24 years. Loved what I did, except for about the last 6 months that I was there. And started here in Salt Lake, went back to Kentucky for about 3 years, came back here to Salt Lake, and was given a ton of responsibility. And my Fridays and Saturdays was drinking and doing
Sure.
coke.
Yeah.
That was my Friday and Saturdays. Sunday, get my act together and work my ass off throughout the week again. And Friday hit, I did the same routine for years, and that was my relaxation.
well, mine was, if you think about it, the weird thing about TV news is the most important thing you do is at the very end of your shift is the 10 o'clock news. That's the most watched newscast. And so you've got to be up and energetic and blah, 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 and personable and wonderful and all that kind of stuff. Then you get off the air at 10:35, and if you go home, it'd be like somebody who works 9 to 5 trying to go to sleep at 6:30. You just don't do that. You have an unwinding period.
Wind down.
So mine was artificial winding down. So it happened a lot quicker.
Huh. So when did you notice that things were really getting bad for you? Because you said that you got your job at age 14.
Right. I actually started drinking around that age. I was never comfortable socially around people like the cool kids in school and everything. And Kate and I went to a couple of parties and we were drinking their parents' booze, and I found out I felt really comfortable after drinking the parents' booze, and that's when it started. And then when I went to college, all we did was go to the bar every night and pick up women and that kind of stuff. And it was okay back then. I did morning drive news, and I could stay out till 2 in the morning and be drunk, and at 5 o'clock in the morning be semi-sober and read the news on the radio station. But I was in my late teens, early 20s.
Yeah, it's a little easier back then.
Big difference. Then I just started using alcohol as a crutch. And the thing that made it so easy and contributed to my addiction was the fact that we were always treated like stars. You like at that big rock station, if we played a record, it became a hit nationally. So we were invited to all the rock concerts for free, all the restaurant openings for free, all the cocktail parties for free. Frequently, no matter what market I worked in, you could go to a bar, and if somebody recognized you, they'd bring you free drinks. It was just one of these deals where you're treated like a star almost.
Yeah.
And what it did, and it always involved alcohol. So I generally would go home after the news, regardless of where I was working, and drink until I passed out. And that was, you brought up the dirty little secret. That was my secret, because I didn't want people to, and one of the things I emphasize in my bio or in my story is the fact that when you saw me on the air, I was sober. And I didn't want people to think that I got screwed up and was on, because it'd be really hard to read a fast-paced newscast. Today in Ukraine, there's, you can't do it. And so I would never drink in the daytime. I always just drank until I passed out at night. And I was very successful in my TV job. My personal life sucked. I went through 4 wives. I was never faithful to any of them because you combine the celebrity status with being drunk, and it was really easy to be unfaithful to a wife.
Yeah.
And plus the fact I was never present. I remember every one of my wives would say, "Can we sit down and talk about this?" And I'd say, "Well, let's go to a restaurant or a bar and we'll have a couple of drinks and talk about it," you know. And so I was never really present. And when I finally did seek help, and my response was always, "Don't bitch at me. I make good money. We're living in a nice house, and this is what I do. I do drink a lot, but I'm not an alcoholic." Okay, that's what I always claimed. And when my 4th marriage was breaking up, like 12 years ago or something, what was happening is I started blacking out every time I drank. And I like to be in control. And so if we would go to a party, me and my 4th wife, I'd get up in the morning and not remember a thing about the party. And I'd gauge the way she looked at me in the morning as to whether I had screwed up the night before. And I'd have to say stuff like, "So did you have a good time at the party?" You know, and you know, and if she said, "Yeah, it was great. It was a fun time," then I'd say, "Whew, I made it through." And it got to the point that I didn't like the fact that she could, as we were growing apart and things were getting angrier, she could make up a story and tell me that I did this, that, or the other thing, and I'd have to go along with it.
Yeah, because you didn't know if
I
that
didn't
was
know,
true.
you know. And so I finally decided that I needed to get help. I went to Detox up at Uni, which is now the Huntsman Mental Health Institute, or yeah, I think that's what the name is. And then I went to an intensive outpatient program up there called Recovery Works. And after I got that was a 3-month program, every Monday through Thursday or Friday, 4 hours a night. And when I got out of that, I stayed sober for 9 months, and I swear we have an addict brain, those of us that are addicted to alcohol or heroin or whatever. And my brain told me, "You know, Randall, you could probably go to the bar and have a couple of beers." And I thought, that seems reasonable. I've been sober for 9 months. And after 2 beers, my brain was saying, "You know, you're not doing anything crazy. You haven't blacked out. You're okay. You could have a couple more." And I ended up blacking out that night and crawling home. I've always lived downtown, so I didn't get arrested for a DUI. And at the time, and I'm a logical person, I'm semi-intelligent, and I truly believed what my brain was telling me. That's the only way I can describe it. It was like, it's okay to have a couple more. Yeah. It's okay to have a couple more. You're okay. You know, and I hate the fact that that's what my brain was telling me, but it'd been ingrained in me that for decades I was a functional alcoholic. And that's my dirty little secret, because I never wanted, and the thing that most alcoholics and addicts will tell you is they feel a lot of shame for what they've done.
Yeah.
And you know, I still screwed around on my wife, but I always felt shame about it. Didn't stop me from doing it again when I drank some again. And so I would have people come up and say, "I love watching you on the 6 o'clock news." And I'd say, "Thank you very much." And you know, and that feature you do with kids who need to be adopted, I really love that. You're really a good person. And I always felt I'd say thank you very much, and I was nice, but I always felt shame for the way I was living my life and having other people perceive me as something different than what I really was.
Yeah.
And that's why I never talked about the fact, you know, that I drank a lot, that I was an alcoholic. And I was ashamed of it. And I never wanted to admit it, even though I knew I was. The first time first time I went to an AA meeting, I said, "I'm Randall. I'm an alcoholic."
It's hard to get out.
It's because it has such a negative connotation to people, and did back then. That was 10 years ago. But and I at the time, we were laughing before we went to a break about, cameras screwed up and stuff like that. And I used to be a much more intense, angry, perfectionist kind of person. And if there was a screw up like that, as soon as the newscast was over, I would berate my fellow employees who seemed to be responsible for the screw up. I had no patience whatsoever as an alcoholic. I'm still an alcoholic, but I'm an alcoholic in recovery. But and the example I use is if we'd buy a table at IKEA that you had to put together, I would be drinking beers at home, trying to put it together on a Saturday, and I'd lay out the screws and the nuts and the bolts and everything, and I'd start putting it together, following the instructions, and something would go wrong, and I'd say, "Screw it, I'm not going to put this together. We got to take this thing back." And then my wife would always put it together, and I had no patience whatsoever. And I got angry real quick, and I did things I'm ashamed of. And now, and this grew with sobriety, and it didn't happen like overnight. It happened over a period of years. I'm a very patient person now. I'm much more understanding. I would never, I'm never going to get married again, but if I were to get married again, I would be faithful. I'm an entirely different person. And so the excuse that I used, saying, okay, I'm sober when I go to work and I'm sober when I do the newscasts, the fact that I was getting drunk every night really influenced my behavior even during my sober periods. And things have changed. It's just dramatic. I see the world through. And one of the first things one of my therapists said when I was going through that IOP program is it was up at the U. I mean, up in that area. That's where it was. And we were sitting in her office, and it was in the fall. And she said, and I looked out her window, and I said, "My God, those leaves are beautiful." And she said, "That's a breakthrough." And I said, "What? I'm looking at leaves and I say they're beautiful?" And she said, "You wouldn't have noticed this.
Yeah.
In your
depth
screwed
of the addiction.
up, you don't look at the beauty of the world when your mind is cloudy all the time, and you don't appreciate life and the beauty of it all." And all of a sudden, I began to do that. But it takes a long time, and I actually believe that my mind became more clear probably through the first 4 years of sobriety. I think I noticed that my mind was more clear. And now that I'm becoming an old fart, it's like I can't remember names and I can't remember things. And okay, my mind's not getting clear now, but that's because I'm getting old, I guess. But so it doesn't mean that I wouldn't. I mean, tomorrow I could relapse. I mean, and I never rule that out. And my sponsor told me one thing that helped me the second time around to stay sober was, and I never, because I lived for going to parties and going, and drinking no matter where I went. And the idea when I got out the first time that I could never drink again as long as I live, I couldn't grasp. It was like, what? Never again?
Yeah.
And my sponsor said, and I know it sounds trite, but he said, just focus on today, being sober today, going to bed at night, and if you pray, if you're religious, pray. If not, try to meditate and thank higher power that you made it through the day sober, and that you hope you stay sober tomorrow. And just do that on a daily basis, and you don't have to necessarily keep count or anything. And all of a sudden the years started piling up, and I don't think about it that much anymore.
Wow.
You know.
It's really cool that you said that you were looking at like, what do you mean I can never drink again? You know, because when my wife went 13 months sober once. Our relationship was the best it's ever been.
Right.
And then she ended up taking a drink of alcohol at a stay vacation
All
her
it
and I
takes
was
is
doing.
one.
And I mean, both our lives turned upside down. You know, she got her first DUI after that, and then driving on a suspended license,
Sure.
and started getting thrown in jail. And I was one of those, like many of us on the other side. It's like, just stop. Just stop. How hard can it be?
You did
Just
for 11
stop.
months. Why can't you do it now?
Yeah, right? Yeah. And she threw at me something. She threw something out at me, and she goes, what if I told you, because I love ice cream. I blame that on my grandpa, but it's really, yeah. She's like, what if I told you you could never, ever have ice cream the rest of your life? It's frickin' ice cream. That's what I told her.
Right.
You know, not understanding what she was throwing back
Sure.
at me.
Yeah.
And I have been able to go back to that and look at it going, oh my gosh, yeah, what if I couldn't
Right.
have ice cream? Now, coming up on 23 months sober for her, we were watching a movie, I don't know, a week or so ago, and this gal's grabbing a bottle of Jack Daniels and she's drinking it, and my wife's just like, oh my gosh, you know, she's getting these triggers, but she's like, oh, I don't miss the taste of this stuff. But then there's other times she's pissed off because if we're watching a movie and the person gets up and leaves a drink on the table and they're leaving, she's like, why aren't you finishing it? Finish it, you know? And I've had another guest on the show that says the same thing. Still to this day, is like if he watches a movie and someone doesn't finish a drink, it drives him freaking crazy. How could you leave a drink sitting on the table? Finish it, you know? And it's that brain
Sure.
kicking in.
I used to
going,
do that all the time. If my wife and I went out to dinner, she could drink socially. She could drink like a normal person, and she'd maybe have 2 glasses of wine with dinner. Mm-hmm. And there'd be like a third left on her second glass, and she'd say, I'm ready to go. I go, you're not going to finish that? And she'd say no, and I go, okay,
I got it.
I'm finishing it. Why waste good wine?
Yeah,
You know,
that's
that
it,
kind of
right? I'm
stuff.
paying for that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's crazy, that power of the mind. I had neighbors. There was an older couple, and he smoked his whole life for 40 years, and he quit. But he always kept a pack of cigarettes. When I'd go over, he'd talk to me, and he'd show me a pack of cigarettes, and he goes, it's just my comfort. I can have one if I want one.
Right.
But I don't do it. And it's just wild, that power of the mind, what it does to you.
Well, in human nature, I think, is that you can't do this, then you want to do
Then
it.
you're
Yeah.
gonna do it for
You
sure.
know.
Well, we start that at teenagers, right? If our parents
Sure,
say you shouldn't do this, we're like, oh yeah, watch me. You know, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, and one thing too that I learned during my wife's addiction, Randall, is being on the other side. I really never gave her credit where credit should have been due. You know, she went through 8 recovery centers. You know, I think she went to, she was at Wasatch Recovery, Phoenix a couple times, Odyssey, Epic. Another place that's here in Murray. I never do remember the name anyway. You know, she'd go in for a month, 30 days, or the 60 days. Longest was the 6 months program, which she was at Epic for 6 months. And she would get out, and it's like, I'm never going to drink again, you know. And then sometimes it was 24 hours. Other times it maybe had been a month or 2 months, and then right back at it. And it would always tick me off. You know, it's like, freaking, you're jumping right back on that hamster wheel. And then I'd be pissed off at myself because I'd jump right back on that hamster wheel with her. And my good friend Jim, who was a guest on the show, he's the one who started drinking at age 5, and he was a full-blown alcoholic by junior high school. He was a blackout drunk. You know, sometimes he wouldn't wake up for 2-3 days and wake up and thought just a couple hours went by and realized 3 days had gone by. And we were at a networking group once, and this was probably about 1.5 years ago. And he's like, Al, come here, I gotta show you something. And he reaches in his pocket and he pulls out his 5-year chip. And I'm like, oh my gosh. He goes, yeah, I knew you'd appreciate this. Check it out, man. He's all excited. I'm like, oh my gosh, Jim, this is really cool. You know, and I'm rubbing it like what they do, you know, rubbing the love and everything in it. And I'm like, yeah, I remember when my wife hit 13 months, her first year, you know, even I went out and bought her this really, really nice chip and gave it to her. And I said, when she started drinking, I took the son of a bitch away. And I watched him double up his fist. I literally thought he was going to pop me right between the eyes.
Yeah.
And he goes, don't you fucking ever take a chip away from, because they deserve every moment.
Sure.
And I started thinking about it afterwards, and I'm like, I never gave my wife credit. She kept trying. Yeah, she went through 8. There's people that's gone through 18. They never quit trying. And as long as they're still going back, and we had a guest on our show who, very, very successful businessman, runs a 100-year-old company that's started here in Salt Lake. And he battled porn addiction for 2 decades. And he was on a business trip. And he says when he was on this business trip, he was really struggling with some things. And he's like, I'm just going to go over to this bridge and I'm going to jump off this bridge. I'm done. And he said before he was getting ready to jump off the bridge, he's talking to God, and he's like, why can I not get control of this? Why does it have such an effect on me? And he said he heard this voice basically saying, you're not celebrating the days that you don't use, because they call it pretty much the same thing. And he started thinking about it, and he's like, gosh, I went 2 days once.
Mm-hmm.
I went 8 days once. I went 1 day once. And he goes, at that moment, he realized instead of beating himself up for the times that he relapsed, he started celebrating every single day that he didn't. And before he knew it, pretty soon it was 15 days.
Mm-hmm.
It was 60 days.
Yeah.
So he's like, I started celebrating those moments. Instead of beating myself up like you were saying earlier,
Sure.
Randall, about feeling guilty for going back. And that's what happened with my wife. She'd feel guilty that she just failed me again and hurt my feelings and disgraded herself by going back to this. So what does she do? She medicates herself again just to come back off and go, oh, I just did it again, to medicate herself again. Instead of celebrating those times. And I'm very, very grateful for my friend Jim for doing that. And I'm glad he didn't hit me too, because I really thought he was going to pop me between the eyes. And I'm just very grateful for that, because it really opened my eyes up. And I have heard people say that sometimes it takes up to 7 different recovery times. And I've had other people come on and say, no, I think that's just an excuse. And I guess it's just for whatever works for each individual.
It's the national average is 7.
7, yeah.
And the way I look at it is, okay, how long did you stay at number 1, number 3, number 4, okay? And what did you learn? Well, you may not remember everything you learned, but I think each time you probably take a piece of whatever it is they were working on you with, and that after 7, you've got an accumulation of some thoughts in your brain that perhaps will lead to recovery.
Yeah.
And so you're not a failure because you left the program or because you didn't succeed in the program. You succeeded for a week, a month.
Yeah.
And that's success. So that's a good way to look at it. No, you're a loser because you walked out on this program,
Yeah. Well, and that's how I threw a lot of daggers at my wife. Holy cow.
Well, it's hard to deal with,
Yeah.
I understand what you went through because my wife's went through that with me. And they threw a lot of daggers. And every time I got divorced, because I was drinking all the time, I said, it's the bitch's fault.
Yeah, right.
But now, as I look back, it was probably 98% my fault with every failed marriage.
Yeah.
Yeah,
when we do, again, start holding ourselves accountable, and I really had to hold myself accountable a lot, too.
Sure.
For all the crap that my wife went through. I filed divorce on her 3 times and canceled it 3 times. Something kept me, But
it's hard for, one of the things that is one of the most emotional things that our clients do at Odyssey, and I think most places do this, is you write a letter. I can't remember what we call it. You write a letter as if, if you're my wife, okay, and I'm the drunk husband. I write a letter from the perspective of my wife to me. And those are some of the hardest things that our clients do, or to their parents. You know,
Yeah.
okay, this is mom talking to me. This is what she's writing to me. And a lot of them, I had one the other night I facilitate a family support group, and the person that we had on, one of our clients, said that he just broke down and cried as he was writing this while he was in Odyssey House, because he's seeing it from the other side. He's trying to empathize with what he put his parents through, and through his mom's eyes, what it was like. And it's hard to see through somebody else's eyes. You know, for you to see through your wife's eyes with alcoholism, or her to see through your eyes what you're dealing with. Those are hard things to do.
Yeah, until when I first started this podcast, my wife was pissed. She's like, yeah, you're just going on there and you're talking about me and blah, 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 blah.
Which you are.
Which I am, yeah. And she finally came in and saw a show. And on the way home, she goes, don't you stop. Don't stop. And when I started doing speaking and she was coming out to some of my events, she goes, I had no idea that's what you were going through. It's like, well, how could you? You were freaking drunk all the time.
Right.
How could you? And when I tried talking to you, you wasn't listening, you know, because you were justifying every freaking thing you could to say this is why you're getting drunk, you know. And it's really helped us build, you know. And as you said earlier, as the sobriety starts getting further and further along, I mean, I started seeing a change in my wife. She's never been a social type person. And I remember once we were at a grocery store or something, and I hear her talking, and I'm like, what's she talking to? And I turn around, she's talking to the lady behind us. I'm like, hell, that ain't my wife. She doesn't do that shit. And she's just having this full-blown conversation. It's like, man, she's changing. There's something that's happening to her, you know. And sometimes I've used that, you know, a caterpillar, they're just crawling around on the ground, crawling up trees, and then all of a sudden one day they make a cocoon, and then they come out and they're this butterfly. And that's what I've seen and experienced with a lot of people who have been on the show, and it's just so incredible. And one of the things that you were talking about, Ohio's history, that you know, the 12 steps started there at Akron area, and my good friend Dave DeRocher out there at the Other Side Academy brought this up on the show, and I never thought about it until he said it. I don't understand why the hell we're leaving the lives of our loved ones in the hands of insurance companies. You know, and I didn't think of it, and it's because, you know, every time my wife went to rehab, it was either 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and a lot of places like Odyssey or Epic, which, you know, are state-run, and you can go there a little longer, because she was at Epic, I think, for 6 months.
They're not state-run, but we accept Medicaid.
Okay, so that's what it is, Medicaid.
And whereas an insurance company will say, we'll only pay for 28 days.
Yeah.
And that's how long you stay, you know. Whereas Medicaid will pay for a longer period of time, understanding that 28 days is not long enough to find recovery, you know. Yeah,
and that's one of the things that Dave brought up that I've really started thinking a lot about. And Dave was on the show like almost 8 months ago or so.
You talk to a doctor, you talk to anybody who works in recovery, or anybody who works at a medical clinic or any place else, and they'll say the insurance companies totally run what we do.
Yeah.
I mean, they say, we'll reimburse you this amount to remove tonsils. We'll reimburse you this amount for a yearly checkup, and that's what they get paid. I mean, so it's not a free market situation at all.
Yeah.
You know.
And again, it's like, why are they determining how long we stay? Like, they know.
Yeah. How do they know?
Yeah.
They don't.
How do they know? Yeah, and you're exactly right. They don't. That's Dave's point, is that they don't, because I tell you what, I mean, even after 6 months, the only reason why my wife didn't drink for 6 months is because she was in a facility.
Right.
Yeah, she got 6 months sobriety, and I'm very grateful for that. But it wasn't long after that she was drinking again.
Right.
And it's because it takes longer. I mean, there are some, that may get it, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm done. And it works. But again, we're not all the same. We're all wired differently. And I'm so grateful that he brought that up. And when we did our Healing Utah Success Summit in St. George this past August, he brought it up in his talk. And I had to bring it up when I did my talk. Because again, I'm not understanding why something needs to change. Because I've talked to people who are sober, clean and sober now, and they wanted to get clean and sober a long time ago. They just didn't have the means to do it.
Right.
And again, this is someone's husband or wife or son or daughter. And yeah, it's a little different when it's your spouse, because we can just divorce you and boot you out and say, hey, I'm done. See ya. But when it's our child, it's hard for any parent to just say,
sure.
And I'm sure even with like you, Danny, with your sister, it's your sister.
Well, my sister and my son, so it's...
Yeah, you love the hell out of them, and
hard.
It's hard to toss them out, and yes, it took me a long time to realize I had boundaries. It took me a long time to even realize I had triggers, and there's just so much for us to learn on the other side. And again, some laws I think have to be changed. There's got to be a different way to where we can help more people, help them get back to their lives and not leave it in the hands of insurance companies, because a friend of mine in St. George who was a guest on our show, and we've just become really good friends, and we do speaking events together, and she was at a recovery place. I won't say who it is. And she came back from an event one time, and she comes back and all her stuff's sitting on the front porch. She's like, what's going on? They're like, well, you didn't follow this and you didn't follow that, so you're out. And she's like, wait a minute, I've done everything you guys have asked me to. Down the road, she finally found out the reason why they booted her out, because the insurance said, we're not paying no more.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you were only like 28 days in.
Yeah.
And they booted you.
Yep.
Because they didn't want to pay anymore.
Right.
Is that fair for them?
No.
It's a bummer.
I guess you get what you pay for. I mean,
yeah.
The places that charge 30, 40, 50,000 a month are very posh places, and people choose to go there if their insurance will pay for it for a month. But and places like Odyssey or Epic are very utilitarian. And it's certainly not like taking a vacation, but I would suspect that probably more places where you stay longer and are more like your normal life have a better chance of helping you with recovery than going to some place that looks like a mountain resort,
Sitting in a jacuzzi in a hot tub.
Or the late night ads on TV. I used to see Malibu Recovery or something where
I've
you'd
seen
have your
those.
own private chef and a masseuse and everything. Well, that doesn't get into your head about why you're a heroin addict or why you're an alcoholic. It just says this is fun for a month.
Oh yeah,
Nice little break.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sitting in a hot tub with a virgin strawberry daiquiri or something like that.
Yeah, the system needs to change. But I certainly don't have the answers. But
I wish I did. I wish I did. That, and it's also been really tough, for her to find a job because of her past history, being arrested and things like that. And
well, that's changing.
That is starting to change.
About Raza and Clean Slate Utah. Have you had any of them on?
No. So is it Amy Griffith, right? Or what's
Amy
her last
Dashel.
name? Yeah. So I've been working on getting her on the show.
Yeah.
Haven't yet, but I know she has been a huge voice.
They're doing great stuff, and in most treatment centers, you have. I mean, the other side does. Most treatment centers do. You have people who are in recovery, working with people in recovery, and so one of the benefits that Odyssey just started, I think last month, was that we will pay Raza and Clean Slate Utah, because a lot of our people do have criminal records, to clean your slate, to clear your records. And I talked to Amy the other day, or maybe it was Destiny. I can't remember which one, but we've already had 18 of our people have their records totally expunged.
Wow.
That's awesome.
And we're paying the freight on that. I think I can't remember what it costs, but it's a lot less than if you hired a lawyer.
So I think my wife said it was like $100 because she's wanting to get saving up for it, so she can have her record expunged.
Right.
And
It's so important, but it's so important not just for jobs, but for getting housing or
absolutely,
or anything.
Yeah. And again, I'm glad someone like Amy has done that, because I've always said that, I'm just as guilty as well, but a lot of people, you go downtown, you see the addicts and that, and you say, hey, get your act together, give back to society. So they start working on really getting their lives back on track, but then they can't get their life back on track because no one wants to give them that opportunity. Right. So what do? They go right back to what they knew. And so it's like it's this vicious circle. So if we want them to get their act together and give back to society, and they're wanting to do the same too, hell, let's give them that opportunity. Right. Let's not hold it against them. And we went, my wife and I, about 2 months ago, was invited to go to a, oh my gosh, what do you say? They were bringing a sober living into a subdivision, and the neighborhood didn't want anything to do with that. And so we was asked if we'd go out and support, and we did. And the mayor out there knows me, and he goes, would you like to get up and say something? And I did. And I tell you what, and I understand a lot of their fear because they don't understand. So I'm not saying anything bad about these people, because a lot of them just don't quite understand like I didn't understand. But I tell you, it was like a frickin' lynch mob. Holy cow, Frankenstein's coming into our neighborhood, and we got our pitchforks and our fire, our torches, and no way in hell. And, again, as I mentioned earlier, this is someone's son or this is someone's daughter, and that was going to be a woman's home. So it was all women that was going to go to that one. And it's like, what is it, people? You want them off the streets. Now they're getting off the streets and they're working their butts off to get their life back on track, and no one wants to give them that opportunity. Right. We all got skeletons in our closet, every single one of us. Some a little bit more than others, but we all still have them. And it's past mistakes of being young and dumb or not thinking, or however you want to look at it, and it's just all part of life, also in a way for some of us. But
I wish people would accept more of that. One of my jobs we have like 30 locations now around Salt Lake County, and one of my jobs is to make sure it's fitting well into the area where the houses are. And so I go to neighborhood community council meetings, and I hand out my card and with my personal cell phone number, and I tell them who I am, and that if you have a bitch about anything that's going on at our facility in your neighborhood, call me. And I've been doing this for 5 years, and I've only gotten 2 calls, and both were about smelly garbage outside. So it's not like somebody went nuts and is beating up somebody on the street, or going around the neighborhood and doing bad stuff, and that should tell you something. Like
absolutely.
When you're talking about a sober living transitional facility, if somebody screws up at that facility, first of all, they're going to be booted out of it, and so they're going to be gone. And they're not going to be coming home drunk from their job or whatever, because they're going back to a sober living place that is supervised.
Yeah, and everyone holds everyone accountable.
Yes. Yeah. So I mean, it's like
and again, it's because they don't know.
No. Exactly.
They don't understand. There was a sober living a couple streets down from where they were bringing in this one, and they had one of the neighbors that's next to that sober living. And the mayor asked them to get up and talk. And he's like, I was just like all you out here. I had my pitchfork as well. Right. I was pissed. I was upset. I didn't understand. He goes, I tell you what, it's been one of the best things for our neighborhood. They're the ones that if they see you outside shoveling the snow off your sidewalk, they'll come over and they'll help you.
Sure.
Or if you need help with your yard work. And someone yelled out, and how many times have the cops been in the neighborhood? And he goes, once. And it was for the neighbor next to the sober living. It wasn't had anything to do with the sober living at all, So gosh, guys, I mean, this has been a great show. Again, thank you for your time.
You say that at the end of every show.
I do, right?
Yeah,
I do. No. Randall, is there something as we're signing off, is there something that you'd like to share with our audience? Some words of wisdom or, yeah.
The problem, addiction is a lifelong, complicated disease that nobody fully understands. If somebody had a real answer for it, they'd be a billionaire and they'd have everybody in the world coming to see them. So you've got to understand that it is a very complicated, lifelong disease. But the thing I've noticed is you can scream and yell all you want, like you did with your wife,
Yep.
or like my wives did with me. And until somebody is ready to get better, there's no point in doing anything. You can have like unconditional love for a person, but you've got to set up boundaries and you've got to stop enabling that person and being codependent with that person. But if the person does not want help, then there's not much you can do until the person decides they do want help. Yeah. And I don't mean that negatively. I mean, I told you why I sought help, because I was frustrated over the loss of control and the fact that I blacked out every time I drank, and I didn't know what I was doing, which meant I could have, I was pretty good about not driving drunk because I knew I would lose my job, but meant that if I would have driven home from a party, I could have killed someone and not even known that I'd run them over. I wouldn't remember it. So I had a reason, and I wanted to get better. But unless there's a reason and you want to get better, there's not much you can do for somebody. Now, the flip side of that is there are a number of people who are arrested for whatever that they've done while they're high or selling drugs or whatever, and are given the choice of, do you want to seek treatment or do you want to just rot your ass off in jail for however long? And an awful lot of the people who are forced to get treatment do succeed. So it's not like they're hopeless. There's nobody who is hopeless. Yeah. But hopefully more people will see the benefits of recovery. I mean, and that's why we do podcasts like this. If you had me as a guest and I say, recovery sucks, I'd rather be drunk. Yeah. It really is not going to help a lot with society.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
I'm going right out and shoot up some heroin because I'll feel better. But thanks for asking me on.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't. People have to talk about the benefits of recovery, and the benefits far outweigh any disadvantage.
That's what our guest on our earlier show said. It's like, I got to live life raw now because I don't have my alcohol to fall back onto. But he's like, I tell you what, man, it's a hell of a lot better than what it was.
Oh, yeah.
So.
And we blamed, just like you said your wife did too. She probably blamed you for a lot of stuff. The reason I drink is because you're such an asshole.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, I blamed everybody in the world. And you'll find that almost every addict and every alcoholic blames their use on something. And the things that they blame their use on are the same things that people who are not addicted go through and handle in life. A death in the family, being dumped by a girlfriend or a boyfriend, losing your job, having somebody yell at you. We all go through that in normal life. The average person who's not an addict for some substance deals with it in a different way. Mm-hmm. My inclination whenever I got yelled at or something, or even if I got a promotion, was to get drunk and numb myself. We just think differently.
Yeah.
So,
Randall, thank you. Danny, is there anything you'd like to say?
I think he hit it pretty good. Like, there is hope. Like, seeing from my perspective, seeing my son and my sister go through what they went through and how they're succeeding and living their life. There's always some hope.
Yeah. It's never too late.
No,
really, it's not.
Until you overdose
and
die.
Yeah,
but
my wife and I, we just went to some services just a couple nights ago of a lady friend of ours who just lost her son to an overdose, and Mason and I was talking before the earlier show, and it's like, that's not their intentions. It just it happens, and unfortunately it does. But it is possible. I'm around people all the time that are in recovery and who, my gosh, their lives are extraordinary right now.
Think about this. At an AA meeting once, somebody said, and it was a big, good-sized AA meeting, said, how many of you who are using, okay, or drinking or whatever, are happy? Nobody could raise their hand. I mean, I remember parties where it's yuck, yuck, yuck,
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
when you're drunk,
Yeah.
but nobody says they're happy, But a lot of people in recovery say they're happy.
Oh, absolutely. I love it. Guys, again, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate you
inviting
both
us.
being here. So, guys, all our listeners, all our supporters, our sponsors, Resilience Talk Network, Brad, everyone, thank you for all your support, everything that you do. Again, none of this would be possible if it wasn't for you. We really do appreciate your support. And please keep sending all the messages. We love to hear the messages. Even if there's something we can do better, throw it out there. If you'd like to see a certain show, throw it out there and let us know. And please share and subscribe. Share this show with one person. That's all we're asking. Not to spam anyone. Just share with one person. Ask them to like and subscribe, because you never know what a show like this today may do for someone, whether it's your friend that you're sharing with that battles addiction, or it's somebody that they may know that's battling addiction. We want to continue to spread the word and spread the love and help us get rid of this stigma. So we're going to end it as we do at the end of every show. Remember, addiction is giving up everything for one thing, and recovery is giving up one thing for everything. We're out.